Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, art, and culture, and this is Billboard Breakdown. So yeah, Billboard Breakdown is late, again, and while it may have been late regardless thanks to a blown light bulb in my lighting that I couldn't replace last night at the right wattage and luminescence, in this case the charts were delayed because of Martin Luther King Day, which is a holiday in the United States. And you know what, that's fine, the holiday is very relevant, especially nowadays. But the fact that this happened and will continue to happen throughout the upcoming months, the delays of charts because Billboard shifted their timelines last year on when the charts come out, is just another example of how Billboard doesn't think before they make changes. Remember when they added YouTube streams in the middle of the Harlem Shake, or the absolute disaster that were the charts in the late 90s? In comparison with that, this is a minor inconvenience, mostly for people like me, but it's still exasperating and evidence that they're not thinking. Anyway, enough of me ranting, on to our top 10, where things are actually fairly interesting in that they seem to reflect some coming shakeups. Sure, Sorry by Justin Bieber holds on to the number one spot for a second week, dominant in streaming, but it's not in sales, and it's peaked in airplay. It's only clinging to the top thanks to YouTube, and you have to wonder how long that will last. Honestly, I think Hello by Adele might stick in the top 10 even longer. Sure, airplay is most certainly dropping, and sales and streaming aren't stellar, that's why it's at number 2. It's also being propped up by YouTube on that note, but it's got enough of a lead that its slowdown might just take a little bit longer. But primed against it is Love Yourself by Justin Bieber at number 3, and it's making a push hard, topping sales and roaring up airplay on YouTube. It's probably got a serious shot at taking the next number 1 spot, but what's closer than I think anybody expected is Stressed Out by 21 Pilots, rising up to number 4, as it took in big streaming gains, considerable YouTube and sales, and is steadily closing the gap behind Bieber. It was also picked up its position with Same Old Love by Selena Gomez at number 5, but I got a lot less faith in that song as it's losing airplay, sales, and only barely gaining streaming with very weak YouTube. It's rising on the weaknesses of other songs. I say the same thing for Here by Alessia Cara, which might have jumped up to number 6, but it actually might have gotten a second wind here, because even though the sales really aren't worth mentioning, it actually picked up airplay while streaming and YouTube. They weren't terrible. When things weren't good news was with Hotline Bling by Drake, which slipped down to number 7, basically is hemorrhaging airplay and is basically being held up on streaming, slipping hard, and YouTube barely compensating for non-existent sales. Then there's Stitches by Shawn Mendes falling down to number 8, as airplay spent the week wavering as weak sales and only okay streaming in YouTube. This unexpectedly led to a position that I did not expect, a gain from Like I'm Gonna Lose You by Meghan Trainor and John Legend going up to number 9. And really, it's not because of anything that song did, because it lost in nearly every category. Although it didn't lose as fast as What Do You Mean by Justin Bieber, which fell down to number 10 thanks to being in free fall and everything except YouTube and streaming. And at this point, that's probably not even enough. In other words, the top 10 right now is very unstable. And while the charts didn't pick up a lot of new tracks this week, shifts and losses were significant. So let's start with those, as we had Smoke Break by Carrie Underwood, Top of the World by Tim McGraw, Downtown by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis and his posse, but the two big losses came from Where You At by Future featuring Drake and Where Are You Now by Skrillex, Diplo, and Justin Bieber. Honestly, none of these are all that surprising that they're off the charts, or even that objectionable, all things considered. And that trend continues when you look at our losers this week too. Of the group, I'd say Andy Grammer's Good to Be Alive, Hallelujah, skidding back to 81, and maybe Used to Love You by Gwen Stefani dipping down to 80 are the least objectionable, but beyond that, I'm not about to complain that Gunna by Blake Shelton falling down to 92 as it nears the end of its run, or Drake's Sleeper Success finally fading a little bit more with the right hand going down to 91. And I'm certainly not complaining about Ray Shrimmer's Come Get Her falling down to 96, or Halsey's New Americana abruptly losing all of its momentum to go down to 76. If the American public is finally getting sick of them, I'm not complaining because they're terrible songs. And hell, I can't even complain if you look at the gains either. The worst of them is probably Two Phones by Kevin Gates falling off its debut to go to 71, but turn it off before the third verse and it's actually a pretty tolerable song. Hell, We by Jeremiah might be poorly mixed, but it was better than expected. I don't mind it going up to 64, and as many issues as I might have with G-Eazy being a really boring MC, Me, Myself, and I does have a pretty damn good hook by Baby Rexha, and I've got no problem with it breaking the top 20 at 19, even if I'm a little bit surprised. What was a very big pleasant surprise for me was Sugar by Robin Schulz and Francesco Yates gaining so much traction so quickly, netting impressive sales to leap up to 68. And And if sales trends are anything to go off of, I expect this song to get a lot higher. I'm predicting this is going to become a hit. Of course, the much bigger story this week is the return of some old classic songs thanks to the tragic passing of David Bowie. And while I'll discuss how his new songs from his final album penetrated the charts against all odds, I'm not gonna lie, but it made me smile to see Space Oddity return to 42 and his collaboration with Queen, Under Pressure, back up to 45. Which, if I were still looping in the returning entries into the best and worst of the week, they just stampede over everything else, not even a question there. And on that note, I think it's a perfect time to step outside our established borders and consider another song from around the world. Well, in this case, it's showcasing two American artists on a single that's been cutting some traction on the dance charts, but it's only now broken through in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So, who is this group? Well, have you ever wanted a version of Here by Alessia Cara that was less abrasive and more well-framed? If that's the case, I definitely got the song for you.
All my friends are wasted, and I hate this club. Man, I drink too much. Another Friday night, I'm wasted. My eyes are black and red. I'm crawling back to your bed.
So outside of the electronic scene, you probably haven't heard of Snakehips, a PBR&B electronica duo from the UK. But if you know modern R&B and hip-hop, you probably recognize Chance the Rapper and Tinashe, two artists who I felt haven't quite lived up to their potential in recent years, and yet at first glimpse you wouldn't imagine would work all that well together. And yet Snakehips brings them together in a near-perfect marriage of tone and function, taking some subtle, melancholic organ, the faded vocals, and a rubbery snap with only hints of a late 80s inspired damp synth that perfectly balances against the heavy multi-tracking on the instantly memorable and sticky hook, throwing Tinashe delivering a more somber, self-aware turn as she taps into the loneliness that can come in the club, especially when you have left your partner behind, and Chance the Rapper dropping some extremely well-connected bars about the abuse of painkillers like alcohol, Xanax, and MDMA, and you'd think this song is skidding towards PSA territory at its worst, but the framing swerves here by showing everyone singing along with the hook, and not shy away from placing themselves within that crowd, not talking down to them, but relating to them. I can definitely see this track striking a chord with some audiences, especially around the party circuit. I'd expect to see this blow up in the United States very soon, and it'd be good for it because this is an excellent song. But now on to hopefully something that will be a little bit more upbeat. Spoilers, it's not gonna be. But let's talk about our new arrivals, starting with number 98, Bang My Head by David Guetta featuring Sia and Fetty Wap. You know, with the release of Hey Mama last year, I at least had the hope that David Guetta's music would start developing more texture and personality, beyond his ability to somehow make even his guest stars boring. Considering this is a track trying to bring together Sia and Fetty Wap, two of the most distinctive voices in mainstream music nowadays, making a track tedious with them requires a lot of work, and yet, Bang My Head, it gets there. Aside from being your standard empowerment anthem against a surprisingly monochromatic synth and mid-tempo beat that only piles on the snaps and surprisingly thin synths and vocal layering that builds into an okay melodic groove at best, it does nothing to highlight the huge raw voices and personalities of the guest stars, especially considering Fetty Wap's verse is surprisingly heartfelt. Not bad, even despite its typical call signs. But really, the thing that irks me most about the song is Sia's hook. I get that her lyrics are supposed to be more driven on metaphor than actual words. The challenge, though, of this song is for someone to bang her head against the wall, and though she'll be lightheaded, she'll rise above it? Or, you know, because the concussion hasn't kicked in yet. Because unless Sia's trying to batter down the wall with her head, the premise of the song, especially in the hook, seems a little shaky if you ask me. But really, it's more of a boring song than outright awful, only dipping towards that territory because everyone else here has done better elsewhere. Next, number 94, Drunk on Your Love by Brett Eldredge.
Drunk on your love, love, on your love, love, love. Now I know why I'm feeling so high, high, 'cause I'm still drunk, drunk on your love, oh yeah.
You You know, this is one of those tracks where I'm actually kind of surprised it took this long to get to the radio, because I've been hearing it at country karaoke night for weeks now. And just like the last Brett Eldredge song that charted in the Hot 100, Drunk on Your Love is a bit of a weird specimen outside of country music, although not nearly as good as Lose My Mind. For one, it's playing off of snap percussion and an accordion for its melodic foundation, with what sounds like bongos contributing to the glossy finish of the song. That eventually brings in some lower guitars to provide foundation, and then slips in some glossier synths to match up the much thicker backing vocals. And yeah, Brett Eldredge is a big presence behind the microphone, and generally a likable one, but the lyrics... Look, one of the things I've never liked is the repetition of words that fill up space, especially on the hook. And if this song is intended to sound a little bit intoxicated, even with that, this is just sloppy writing, if I'm being honest. And while on some level it makes sense, Brett Eldredge, he's definitely done better. Number 78, Blackstar by David Bowie.
In the villa of our men stands a solitary candle. In the center of it all, in the center of it all.
You know, it's kind of sad that a song like this would never have charted if it wasn't for David Bowie's death. Although, if I'm being honest, even with that, I'm amazed it's charting at all. David Bowie's final record, Blackstar, was not mainstream accessible, and the title track, prime example of why. For starters, it's nearly 10 minutes long, rides on an unstable drum progression against a very liquid, eerie guitar line and wiry synth, ghostly backing vocals against Bowie's own haggard voice. Then we get to the multiple horn solos and the swells of strings, all of which are intended to create this feeling of uneasy, creeping dread. Things lighten up a bit after the wind-swept and haunted interlude with the brighter swells of strings and horns and the pan flute that flutters over the outro, but it's not like the lyrics get any less chilling and oblique, drawing in occult imagery to further intensify that creeping doom that comes with knowing the Blackstar legacy Bowie holds and owns upon his passing. The song is haunting as hell, not especially accessible for mainstream radio, but you know what? If I'm being completely honest, I would say it drags a little bit. It would not be my favorite song off of David Bowie's final album. This is number 40, Lazarus by David Bowie.
Everybody knows me now.
You know, it's a bit tricky to describe why this song works so damn well for me. The sparse guitar against the sharp percussion as the bass stalks on relentlessly forward against that mournful sax line and a jagged riff that punctuates Bowie's very cryptic sentences. It's a song that replaces the creepiness of Blackstar with an incredible balance between grief and real danger as David Bowie feels himself slipping away from the world beneath him. And yet, midway through the song, there's an odd feeling of exaltation that creeps through, a feeling of blessed release that will come with no longer being the undying man, the Lazarus who died and was reborn again time after time. It's such a delicate balance of emotions between grief and anger and melancholic resignation in the face of that next end. And as the sax solo that ends up the track flutters away into the darkened guitar line that's split apart by the riffs that echo through the mix, you get the feeling that the soul has finally made its exit, leaving the hollow world behind. In other words, if you can't tell, you don't get songs this artistic and potent and impressive on the pop charts that often, and without a question, it's the best of this week. As the worst though, again, there wasn't really an outright bad song on this list, but I'm giving it to Bang My Head by David Guetta, Sia, and Fetty Wap for just feeling kind of formless and generic, not a lot to it. Let's hope next week is a little less bleak, although with the talent on display, it's kind of hard to complain about it. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.